Welcome to Module 7, Lesson 5. This is our last review packet. After this, we start systems, which is a whole new thing, but part of systems requires being able to solve an equation and being able to graph an equation. So that's why we have this packet 5, because we move on to systems after this, and all the things we do in this review packet we'll be covering in systems, which goes beyond this. So lesson 6 and 7 are systems, which means 2 or more equations. And then lesson 8 is the word problems with systems, which all of those are on your module 7 test and on your final. So I want to make sure we're good with it. So this is it. This is a review. You'll notice as we go through, I have some of them circled because there's like way too many. When I'm teaching this in class, I do like every other one, and then I have students practice at home. I don't know if you looked through your packet, but after each set of exercises, there is an answer key. So here's the answer key for the first 5 pages. It's on page 6. And then we do some more, and there's an answer key on page 9 for the pages before that. So throughout the packet, we're just going to skip around because, like I said, this is all a review. We graphed lines in Module 6, we tested on it in Module 6, but we're just revisiting it because it's part of our solving systems, because we can solve systems by graphing and finding the point of intersection. So I'm going to do like 1 or 2 of each type. If you want to practice more, like I said, the ones that I don't have circled that we don't do, just work them out and check them with the answer key included. Okay, so there's 3 different answer keys throughout the packet. So this one was on your Module 6 test, and this is called graphing using the slope and y-intercept. Remember how we learned how to plot the y-intercept first, and then we rise and run from the y-intercept to find additional points on the line. Positive slopes, remember, rise from left to right. Negative slopes, remember, should decrease from left to right. So always check and make sure, like on this one, I know my line should be rising. So when you're done with it, make sure that fits the slope, because that's a good way to catch sign errors, is check the slope and make sure the line reflects that slope. So we start with the vertical intercept, and then we do rise over run. So I always tell students the best way not to miss these is go over to the side and write y-intercept. And we learned this is the y-coordinate of the y-intercept. The y-intercept always has x0, so this would be 0, 3. And then I think we're done with this pin. Then we have our slope, which is rise over run. So write both of those down. Then all you have to do is go to the graph and do what it says. So our slope is always what's in front of the x. It's a whole number. So we learned in chapter 6 to write it over 1. So 5 over 1. So make sure you have a straight edge. Teachers are so picky about this. I know you're going to be taking your test on the computer, so you don't have someone to be picky at you, but in future classes they will be picky. So whenever you're graphing lines, always make sure you have a straight edge. So plot the point 0, 3, just like we did in Module 6, and from that point, not from the origin, from that point you should rise 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and run 1. And on the test, I always tell students they have to have 3 points. So if we rise 5 more, we're going to be off the graph. So do the opposite of this. So that would be fall back 5, go down 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and back 1. And then you can get your 3rd point. So rise 5, run 1. If you run out of graph to make another point, then do the opposite, down 5, back 1. Just make sure you do the opposite of both, and you'll be able to tell if you made a mistake because the points won't line up. And these do, so we're good to go. So sketch in your line. Make sure you put arrows on both ends because lines do go on forever, indefinitely. unless we're doing a word problem. Sometimes we don't put arrows on both ends, but when you're just doing a line out of context without a word problem, it always has arrows on both ends. So you guys remember that from Module 6? I think it was right before or right after break. I can't remember if I did it over video or in class. Okay, B is just like it. So let's go ahead and go to the next page. So we're going to skip to D on page 2. Like I said, I'm doing one of each type. So if you feel like you need more practice, do B and C, and then check them with the answer key on page 6. So the next one I picked was this one. It's different because now the slope is negative. So I do the same thing. I write my y-intercept, which always has x is 0, and then I look here, and that's where it's going to cross the y-axis. That's why it's called the y-intercept. So 0, 3. So I can go over there and plot that point. My slope, which is rise over run on a graph, is what's in front of the x, and that'd be -2. And remember, I need a fraction, so I'm going to write it as -2 over 1. So that's all I need to graph my line. So from the point, the y-intercept, I go down 2 and run 1. And I'm wondering, do you all remember when we were doing this before, whether it's on video or in class, that the denominator's always positive? My favorite saying, you always run forward so you don't trip. So the negative should only be with the numerator. It can't be in both, because if it was in both, that would make a positive slope. 2 negatives in division's positive. Probably that's the most common error on this, is students go down 2 and back 1. Well, then you get a line that's rising, and this line doesn't rise. It falls. So down 2, run 1, down 2, run forward 1 so you don't trip, down 2, run forward 1. So there's our line. Is it falling like the slope says it should? Yes, it is. So connect and arrows on both ends. And there we have it. So the first one had a positive y-intercept and a positive slope. This one has a positive y-intercept but a negative slope. So I would write that little plus sign in just to remind you that that is always going to be run forward. The negative only goes with the numerator. Okay, next we're going to go on to E and F. So if you want to go ahead and shut off the camera and try those on your own, you can. They were both on your last test. So go ahead and do E and F. And you don't have to do the table for E. We learned how to do it without a table, but if you want to do the table, you can. I just know on the final exam and on the Module 7 test, I don't have a table there. So you should be able to do it without. So what do you notice? What's missing? See the typical line that has an X and a Y? This one only has a Y. So do you remember that's one of our special cases? So that means it only passes through the y-axis. So if it only passes through the y-axis, that means it's a horizontal line because it's named by which axis it passes through. So it's horizontal and it passes through at -1. And I know Alex makes you make another point. You can pick any point you want. You could pick, off the line. You could pick that point. You could pick this point. So a lot of students said, oh, on my test, Alex wanted a second point. I don't know what point to pick. Pick any point you want on that horizontal line. So you have to be able to recognize, one, that it's horizontal because it only has one variable. And two, it's horizontal because it goes through the y. It never touches the x-axis. So then we can connect our points into a nice straight line, and horizontal lines, just like other lines, go on forever in both directions. So make sure and put your arrows in. And like I said, Alex is going to make you, and they did on the last test too, do more than 1 point. So find -1 on the y and then just pick any other 2 points or 1 point, however many it wants, on that horizontal line. You don't even have to know the coordinates. You just follow it along and make it click. Okay. If you were asked to do a table, you just say, oh, okay, well, x is -3, 0, and 3. Well, this tells me y must be -1. So you just go down here. All of those have to be -1 because there's no other variable. So this says make y -1. So then when you go to graph it, you'd have -3, -1, 0, -1, +3, -1. So if they asked you to make a t-table, that's what it would look like. There's no x variable, so that just means make all the y's -1, and you can pick whatever you want for the x's. But most of the time they just have you graph it, so you just pick your own 3 points. But one of the points I believe they do want on the axis, so make sure you plot this point first on the y-axis and then any other ones. Okay, F I picked because it has a negative slope and a negative y-intercept. So the y-intercept, remember that means x is 0. And then we pull this number, which would be -2. And the x, whoops, it's getting ready to write x-intercept. And the slope, which is rise over run, is -3 over +1. So when you put it over 1, just remember that run is positive. So what does that look like? Here's 0, -2 on the y. That's another thing I've heard students say, do you know my teacher counted a point off because I forgot to label the axes? So I try to remember it. I think I forgot it on the first graph, but that might be a good idea to remember. And then this one says go down 3, but run forward 1 so you don't trip. Down 3, run forward 1. And there are my 3 points. Connect. Arrows on both ends. And on the test, when I grade on paper pencil, I grade on whether the line's straight. I take a point off if they didn't use a straight edge. I take a point off if they don't put arrows on. So just know that teachers will be picky about that in future classes. So I'm trying to demonstrate the way you should be doing them. Okay, so next we have G and H. So go ahead and do those if you haven't already done them. And remember, any ones we skip, you can go back and do. I don't want you to feel cheated. That's why I included a answer key so that you could do any ones you wanted. Okay, so the y-intercept for this first line is 0, 1, because on the y-intercept, x is always 0. And the rise over run, or the slope, is 4 over 1. So this is the slope. I should have wrote that there because I don't ever want students to forget that that's really the slope. We're just using the formula rise over run. So plot the point 0, 1, rise 4, 2, 3, 4, run 1, rise 1, 2, 3, 4, run 1. I guess that was like the first one. I'm not sure why I picked that one, but the more practice, the better, right? And you guys will never forget this. The calculus teachers have a fit when the students can't come in and can't graph a line. They are maniacs about it because you need it for the tangent line, norm, they call it, the normal. So going to need it for the rest of your math life. So we'll pick up from there.